Hello there, Dr. Yo here, also known as Aaron F. Ross, with the second installment of my series, Video Synth Tools and Techniques, in which I share what I've learned about video synthesis and the LZX modular ecosystem. And today I want to talk about a module that is very dear to my heart, and that is the VU005 Dual Sine Waveshaper from Syntonie. Before we get into it, I want to acknowledge something that I think is important, and that is that the mere fact that there are other manufacturers aside from LZX indicates that the LZX modular standard has been a success. It's been adopted. And we have a small cottage industry of other companies, really individual makers, who are producing modules to extend the capabilities of the core LZX lineup. And Syntonie has done this in a big way. There's actually quite a number of very cool modules available from Syntonie, such as encoders, decoders, quadrature oscillators, and so on. From my perspective, VU005 is a very important module because it provides a function that I have not seen in any other video synth tool. And that is simply to take an incoming signal and push it towards a sine wave. Okay, well, why is that important? It's because it allows us to manipulate all different types of signals in many wonderful ways that we can't do otherwise. When I hear the term sine waveshaper, that makes me think of a video rate oscillator, like a triangle wave, being pushed into a sine shape and being softened up. And yes, the VU005 does do that. And you may be thinking, well, so what? I don't care. I already have sine waves in my system. I don't need something that's going to change a triangle wave into a sine wave. But the key to VU005 is that it has an adjustable control. So we can get waveforms that are in between, and we can get waveforms that are sine-ish, they're sine adjacent. This gives us a lot more control. VU005 is a function processor. It takes an incoming voltage and does some work on it and outputs a corresponding modified voltage. It does not care about the frequency of the incoming signal. So it'll work on anything from a video rate signal to a static voltage and anything in between. So it can take a low frequency signal such as an LFO or an envelope generator and modify that. So for example, we can take a linear transition and turn it into a slow in, slow out transition. That's one of the 12 principles of animation. It refers to when an object moving by itself takes some time to come out of a resting position, and it also has to slow down as it reaches a stopped position. So that's something that we could do in lots of ways, but the key to VU005 is that it's all automated. We set up a curve, and it doesn't matter what the speed of that transition is, we'll always get that beautiful naturalistic slow in, slow out. And that's much easier than if we tried to set that up with, for example, an ADSR envelope that was being modulated. That would be a really complicated patch and it might not work well when we try to change the speed of transition. But VU005 will just do it, just naturally and perfectly. One area of analog video synthesis that I think could use more attention is tone mapping. The VU005 tone mapping is going to increase the contrast of your image, and it's going to do that very gracefully by sort of compressing all the highlights and compressing all the darks as well. But it's always going to maintain the 0 to 1 range. And this means that it is perfect for manipulating images, especially photographic or video image, that you bring into the system. There are other tools in the LZX ecosystem that perform basic tone mapping functions, such as DSG3, the dual shape generator. It has parabolic wave shaping functions. Or the legacy Expedition series module, Arch, has logarithmic and exponential outputs. Arch is no longer available, but there is a currently available module called Gamma from Foxing Hour, and it has those same logarithmic and exponential outputs. But none of those are as sophisticated as VU005 for three reasons. Number one, VU005 has that beautiful S-curve shape. It's going to compress both the highlights and the blacks, which is something that doesn't really work with those other solutions. Second of all, VU005 is adjustable, so we can dial in a precise wave shaping function. None of those other options have any controls. It's just plug it in and you get whatever it wants to output. The LZX Shape Changer module does have an adjustable gamma control, but Shape Changer is not available and it's very rare. Finally, VU005 also has a kind of secret weapon, which is an adjustable shape. And that allows us to change the symmetry of the curve. That's a really unique feature, and that's kind of the killer app of VU005, so that we can actually precisely dial in the exact look that we want. In my video about the LZX proc module, I demonstrated its usefulness for pre-processing a signal. Maybe you need to send your signal into some module that lacks a control, like it doesn't have an attenuverter, or it doesn't have a control voltage input. Well, you can use proc to sort of massage that signal before it hits the other module. Very good. But you know what? VU005 is even more powerful in certain pre-processing workflows. You can control the relationship of tones within the image or within the signal, which is something you can't do with proc. Proc is just going to give you the ability to stretch the dynamic range or bias that signal up or down, but all the tones within that image are going to maintain the same relationship to one another. But VU005 is going to let you change the contrast curve. And that in turn will allow you to dial in exactly the contrast that you need in order to get the result that you want from some other module. And the example I'll show today is the Sine function generator. Here's the Dr. Yo video synthesizer in its current state as of February 2023. We're of course going to be focusing on the VU005. As you can see, I've got 4 of them here. And you might be thinking, wow, Dr. Yo, that's kind of a lot. What are you going to do with all those? Well, the purpose here is I want to process 2 independent RGB signals. Those are going to be coming out of TBC2, and that's what this gap in the rack is here. So when TBC2 arrives, I'm going to be able to take 2 RGB signals and process them through VU005. And that's going to take up 3 modules because each module has 2 independent channels. I've also got a 4th module left over, so I can also process maybe a luminance or Y signal, or maybe an animation low frequency signal, or some combination of those. So in my case, 4 modules is not overkill. That's actually the magic number. Let's take a closer look. VU005 has 2 independent channels, A and B. And for each of those channels, we have 2 potentiometer controls. We've got the level knob. That adjusts how sinusoidal the output is going to be. And then we've also got the shape knob, the little teeny one. That's the secret weapon I was talking about, which allows us to get asymmetrical shapes. This will give us quite a lot of artistic control. So we can see exactly what's going on. We're going to just feed a linear ramp into VU005. I'm going to take a ramp out of the DSG3 dual shape generator. And to do that, I'm actually going to be using the LZX triple mini snake rather than just any old cable, because we're going to be pushing video. So I just want to make sure I don't lose any signal along the way. I'm taking the absolute output of the dual shape generator and plugging that into my encoder. I've got an ESG3 up here. I'm doing a monochrome signal, so I only need to go into the top red input of ESG3. And in order to make sure I'm only getting a single ramp, I've inserted a dummy plug into the vertical ramp input. DSG3 has a horizontal and a vertical input. If nothing's plugged into those inputs, we'll get the internal ramps. If we want to get just a single ramp, we can break the normal to one of the other ramps. And I've done that here with ye old dummy plug. I've had these since the 80s, never knew what I was going to use them for, but now I've got the perfect use case, breaking the normal to one of the channels of DSG3. And you can use any ordinary cable for that. It doesn't need to be a dummy plug, but if the end of that cable touches something, you're going to get a glitch. So you probably want to plug that into maybe a 0 voltage output or some jack that's not being otherwise used. We also want to make sure that the switches are in a neutral position, so we're getting a linear ramp. Let's take a look at that. So we've got our waveform monitor there telling us that we have a linear ramp, and that's because of the position of these switches. The top switch is invert. Okay, so I don't want to invert. I just leave that up, so I'm not inverting. The middle switch is rectify. We can fold that signal once or twice. Leave that at its center position, so we're not rectifying. And then the third switch is the parabolic Waveshaper I mentioned earlier. We can get exponential or logarithmic-ish results here. So we can get a good read on exactly what VU005 is doing. We don't want to be applying a tone map here at this stage. So with that switch in the center position, we've got a linear ramp. All right, let's patch this up. We just want to take the output of DSG3, feed it through VU005, and then to the encoder. So I got this cable which is currently feeding the encoder. Plug that into the output of VU005, channel A. I've got another cable here. I'm going to take the output of the dual shape, the absolute output, that's important. Take that absolute output and plug that into VU005, channel A. All right, so we're just sending a linear ramp through VU005. Let's take a look at that. So with that level control set to more or less the 12 o'clock position, check it out. We're actually getting a completely flat color there. We've just got a neutral gray. So this is a gain control that fades to gray. And as we push that up, we will get a more sinusoidal look to our ramp. And if we keep pushing it, we'll actually exaggerate that. So it's no longer a sine, it's now something else. And additionally, you'll notice that we're clipping some information in the low end there. So some of our blacks are getting crushed. If we push this into the negative zone, we'll not only invert, but also shape our ramp. Very cool. All right. So I generally set this to around 3 o'clock or so, so I'm not actually crushing. Then we've got the shape control, and that again is our secret weapon. As I adjust that, we're going to see we're able to shift the entire wave shape. As I increase that into a positive value, we're now compressing the highlights even more. If I bring that into a negative value, we're going to be crushing the blacks, and you'll notice that we don't get a flat wave shape at the top. So this is kind of more like a traditional gamma effect here, where we're not actually getting an S-curve. So the combination of these two knobs will give us quite a wide range of contrast curves. So we can kind of just dial in exactly what we want to see. Cool, so that gives you a sense of exactly what's going on by just using a ramp as our source. Let's try an actual video image. So instead of taking the output of DSG3, I'll take the output of my decoder. I've got the Syntonie VU003B decoder up here. Just going to take the Y output of that, or just the luminance. See what that looks like. So with this patch set up, now we adjust our level here. We can see how we're able to adjust the contrast of our image. Let's bring that up full screen. Whoa, how cool is that? So I can get these kind of ghostly effects here with that level set to a really, low value near the center. And by the way, when this is centered, the shape is not going to do very much. It is going to have an effect, but it's not going to be really very evident. I'd like to set the level up to maybe around 2:30 or 3 o'clock, so I'm not actually crushing my blacks at all. And then I can adjust the shape and stretch the contrast up or down. Wow, that is pretty great. This is really what I was waiting for all along in video synthesis, is this level of control over the image. So even just this is already super valuable. All right, let's see what we can do with VU005 in conjunction with other modules. It's very useful to pre-process a video signal so that we can change the relationship of tones to one another. That comes in really handy in situations where we have some processor module that lacks a voltage control or an attenuverter. Even if it had those things, it probably still wouldn't be able to control the relationship of those tones to one another. And VU005 gives us just another level of magic to an already amazing tool such as the triple function generator, which I also used in the proc video. This is the reverse landfill version of the Lars Larson LZX version of the Dan Sandine image processor function generator, which kind of acts like an equalizer. We have independent control over the brights, the midtone contrast, and the blacks of any signal. But there are fixed breakpoints between these. So we can't change, where the breakpoint is between the midtone and the whites, for example. But using VU005, we can kind of get that effect because we can stretch the signal in different directions, and that's going to make it land in different places at these fixed breakpoints. Okay, so let's take a look. I've got my input to ESG3 here. I'm going to plug that into the output of the first channel of my function generator. And then I've got another cable here. I'm going to take the output of VU005, channel A, and put that into the triple function generator's input. Now that's all patched up. Let's see what that looks like. Whoa, we've got a really cool solarization effect here. I've got my whites dialed down to black. Got my midtones here. You can see how that's kind of shifting things around. And then I've got the darks. I can make that fully negative, or I can get that cool solarization effect. So that's just the function generator itself. But then we've also got our VU005, and that's really what's giving us the ability to do super cool stuff. Look at that. All right, Tales from the Dark Side, here we come. Now you'll notice that because I'm doing the solarization effect, I'm pulling all those whites down to blacks. And so I'm only getting half of the total bandwidth of the system here. So I'm not actually getting any whites, I'm only getting grays. So I want to actually amplify this signal as it comes out of this channel of the triple function generator. I can do that in lots of ways. One way is actually just to put it through another channel of the function generator. So I got another cable here. I'm going to loop this through. So I'll take the output of function generator channel 1 and unplug that. And instead, I'm going to send function generator channel 2 to my encoder. Okay, and now what we're seeing is it's actually normaled through. So these settings are in effect here because it's normaling through from channel 1 to channel 2. But I don't actually want that normal. I want to actually daisy chain these channels. Okay, so I'm going to do these in series, taking the output of channel 1 of the function generator, plugging it into the input of channel 2 of the function generator, and that gives me the ability to actually just amplify the signal. And the way to do that actually is with this switch in the up position. It's actually going to bias the incoming signal so that the circuitry works with the LZX 0 to 1 voltage standard. The Sandine IP worked on a bipolar standard, which is negative 0.5 to positive 0.5. So if we wanted that bipolar operation, we would flip this switch into the down position. And that just so happens to give us the ability here to just amplify the signal. I'm not able to go all the way up to 100, but this is fine. It's good enough for art. And then back to our VU005. playing around, especially with that shape. Oh my goodness. How cool is that? Let's look at that full screen. With my function generator set up for that solarization effect and also amplifying the output, all I need to do is play around with these VU005 level and shape and really get some super creative results. So I do tend to put the level into a positive value and also the shape into a positive value. But really, you're going to dial this in depending upon the individual image or footage or scene. And that way you'll be able to get the maximum effect out of whatever module VU005 is feeding, in this case, the function generator. Now, this is just a monochrome image. We haven't even gotten into color yet. But I think you can see how valuable that VU005 is going to be as a pre-processing stage for some other module that's going to perform work on your signal. What else can we do with just a single VU005 module? Well, we can get those beautiful animation ease curves I was talking about. Slow in, slow out. And I've got that set up. I'm using the Brown Shoes Only / Video Headroom Systems crossfade. One side of that crossfade is coming from my decoder. The other side is just a black voltage coming from proc. And then that output of crossfade is going to the ESG3 encoder. And the transition between my video image and black is being made by the DW03 dual wideband oscillator. I've got the triangle wave output of that oscillator plugged into the CV input of my crossfader. So we're getting a simple triangle wave modulation. We're fading up and down, and it's doing what it's supposed to do, but it's not terribly artistic. We can make it a little bit better just by, using the sine wave output instead of the triangle wave output. And we can see that's already giving us an ease in, ease out, which is great. But if we want more control over this, we can employ VU005. And we want to make sure that we're using some source signal that has some kind of slew. In other words, we have to use some signal that actually transitions between 0 and 1. If we just used a pulse or square wave or gate, the VU005 would not actually do anything to that. Because as we discussed earlier, VU005 is always going to keep everything within the 0 to 1 range. So it's going to see a value of 1 and keep it at a value of 1. It's going to see a value of 0 and keep it at a value of 0. It won't do anything to those extremes. It's only going to affect everything in between. So again, you have to have some transition in the first place for this to work. And in this example, I'll just use that trusty triangle wave. So I'm going to take that triangle wave, plug it into channel A of my VU005. And by the way, since I'm dealing with low frequency signals here, I don't need to worry about bandwidth or quality. So I can just use ordinary plain vanilla audio cables. Taking the output of VU005 and putting that into the control voltage input of the crossfade. Okay, and already we can see that that triangle wave is being converted into kind of a sine. Let's play around with that. So I can take my level all the way up to its maximum, and we're getting something even more extreme than a sine. The transitions from dark to white are much faster. And then, of course, we've got the shape control, and that's what really makes this shine, because I can now introduce an asymmetry. So I can bring that shape up, increase that, and now we're only getting a short kind of blip in our transition. It's mostly black. Let's look at this in full screen here. So there we're seeing the result that we were hoping for, which is that we are introducing some asymmetry into that waveform. We're no longer, dealing with a symmetrical duty cycle where the image is on screen for half the time. Now it's on screen for less than half the time. And the greater this shape value, the more extreme that's going to be. But be aware that just like we saw with the video image, when we're modulating that, we can actually push that into such a state where we're losing information. In a low frequency situation like this, what that equates to is we can see that the waveform monitor never goes up to full intensity. All right, so that means we don't actually want to push that far. That's probably good enough. Okay, that's great. We've taken a triangle wave and turned it into something much more interesting. We could take this even further. First of all, we can use the sine wave as our source. We don't have to use the triangle wave. So to illustrate, I can switch my oscillator over to sine instead of triangle and see what that looks like. So now we're getting a faster, sharper transition in and out. Well, we can take this even further by looping one of the channels of VU005 into the other one, daisy chaining them. So I'm going to take the output of channel B. That's now feeding my crossfade CV input. And I'm going to take the output of channel A and put that into the input of channel B. So now one channel of the VU005 is feeding into the other channel sequentially. And now we're getting a much sharper ease in, ease out. So this is almost a trapezoid wave. And we can try different settings, see what they do. Maybe give both of these levels their maximum. And then maybe play with the shape. Maybe one of those shapes can be negative and the other positive. See what that does. All right, so we're in kind of experimentation land, just playing around with the different settings and seeing what they give us. But you can see the basic principle here. We can take any transition, whether that be from a low frequency oscillator or an attack release envelope generator, and we can add an ease in, ease out to that transition. And as I mentioned earlier, the beauty of doing it this way with VU005 is that the duration of that slow in, slow out is going to be proportional to the transition time that's coming from the source, whether that be an oscillator or envelope generator or whatever. What that means is we can easily change the rate of that transition and we will still get that beautiful slow in, slow out. So in this case, I can just increase the frequency of my oscillator, bring that up, and I'm still getting a slow in, slow out, no matter how high I take this. And if we went up into, video rates, where we're actually getting a pattern on the screen, then we would see that that's going to equate to changing the shape of that transition over space rather than time. So just to illustrate, I can go back to my oscillator and maybe change it up, maybe put it in a different range. I've got my range setting here. I can set this up so that it's outputting horizontal bars. Now what these controls on VU005 are doing is changing the softness of that transition. And also, again, the sort of symmetry of that. Very cool. So that's just another use case for VU005 in just a single module situation. Now let's talk about what if you had 2 or more VU005s? Well, then you can go into full RGB land. Let's take a look at that. All right, so here's a super simple RGB patch using 2 VU005 modules. Simply taking the decoder output and plugging it into 3 of the 4 available channels, and then taking that output directly into the encoder. And the encoder is set to completely neutral, so it's not acting as a paint box or anything like that. It's just taking whatever RGB values we give it. All right, let's take a look at this incredible magic we're going to get here. So here we have the RGB patch with the levels set to 12 o'clock position. And on the waveform monitor, we can see we're getting almost no contrast. All right, well, here we go. There's our red channel. And here is our green channel. And here's our blue channel. Okay, already we're getting a high contrast version of the color image, but we haven't even begun to play with all the possibilities here because, of course, we've got the shapes. Those can all be set differently, right? Change those up. Or we can put these into negative land. Whoa! Oh my goodness. Crazy color stuff. Where did that come from?
So we can see that with just 2 of these modules, we can instantly get an incredible range of different colors. And this is something that we couldn't really do with proc. I mean, we can colorize with proc as we saw in the other video, but proc doesn't have the ability to change the wave shape itself. And that is what gives us this amazing palette of otherworldly colors. I don't know what planet we're on anymore, but yeah, it looks kind of nuclear. So that is where things are really at with VU005. I could take this and put that through the function generator if I wanted and make it even more insane. But you can see that this just alone gives us, again, a very wide palette of possibilities. Very, very cool, my friend. So everyone run out and buy at least 2 VU005s because it's going to really heighten your artistic practice in ways that, you may not even realize until you start playing. All right, that is the demonstration of the Syntonie VU005 dual sine waveshaper. I have been Dr. Yo. Thank you very much.